Hey friends, welcome to an emergency episode of the Tennis and Bagels podcast. We got some breaking news today, which was that Novak Djokovic, who flew into Australia under the assumption that he was going to play the Australian Open, he had been granted a medical exemption from the vaccine. When he got into Australia, the Australian border force deemed that that was illegitimate, and he has been told to go home. This is a big piece of information. And with me here today, I have my good friend Vansh. Vansh, what do you think?
Yeah, it's quite the situation. I've honestly never seen anything like this. And we've been through so many majors and we've covered so many tennis events, but nothing like this. I mean, what a time we're living in. But if we could just go back to just sort of giving a little bit more background on the situation.
Yeah.
Yesterday, we learned that Djokovic was cleared by Tennis Australia.
Yes.
Was cleared by Tennis Australia. There was a procedure involved which granted him exemption, which granted him an exemption, as he revealed on his Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah, and this was a pretty thorough procedure as well. Like, it had to go through a couple different panels. There were experts, and the people reviewing the form didn't even know whose form it was. So,
Right.
So like this section, like, there couldn't have been corruption here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there were a lot of, I guess false conspiracies and things floating around saying that this, but I think once we look at the process, I think we could see that it was all completely legitimate and not something that I think you'd want to compromise, especially for public health reasons. And I feel like there were all different kinds of doctors on those boards, from immunologists and and like you said, it was a blind procedure, so they did not know of Djokovic's name or his document. Like, they did not know his identity or anything about him.
Yeah, I think the only area where this process could have been fudged is if the document that listed his condition, if he had somehow gotten a doctor to fudge that for him. But there's no evidence, like before it was given to the Australian panels, but there's no evidence of this. It's all conjecture. So all we can do is really trust the process here. So he got this medical exemption, and I mean, the twist that came was that one of the criteria in that Tennis Australia and the Victoria Health Board, I think, had listed, it was one of the ways people could get a medical exemption was if they had caught COVID in the past 6 months. And I think one of the officials even said that most of the people, she couldn't speak to individuals, but most of the people playing the Australian Open on a medical exemption, that was the reason why, because of that criteria. But when when the news broke today, there was I think it was The Age that said multiple times Tennis Australia had been told, like, that's actually not a valid reason to get a medical exemption, and yet they didn't do anything about it. They had players believe that it was a way they could become exempt, and I mean, we still don't know for sure why Djokovic did get the medical exemption in the first place, but
Right.
I think it's a reasonably safe assumption to say that it was that, and that was the reason it got overturned, I guess.
Yeah, that was the only, looking at the list of the medical exemptions that was provided by the ATAGI yesterday, the Australian Government Department of Health. It seemed like that would be the only sort of plausible, reasonable sort of exemption that crossed my mind first. Knowing what we know, it just kind of seems, because if you look at the other exemptions, there's usually, like, they describe an acute medical condition, which is usually for, like, if you have undergone a major surgery or you have a serious illness of some kind. And I have heard of people getting, I haven't heard too many people getting allergic reactions to the vaccine. I've heard that's quite rare in most situations. And the other reasons are just, like, if you're just if it's like you can prove with concrete evidence that it's like a risk to yourself and others to get the vaccine, which doesn't seem very likely in his case either. So I feel like, and we already know he got COVID in June of 2020.
Yeah.
So if he caught it again in the last 6 months, since he was on the tour playing all this time, it would really it would just be speculation, but I would assume it would have to have been sort of after Davis Cup was over.
Yeah, I mean, there was a photo that
now.
surfaced last month, I think, right, of him next to a basketball player at an indoor
Right.
event, both unmasked. And then that basketball player tested positive for COVID, right? So, it's very possible he could have caught it that way or another way. I don't think his attitude towards the pandemic was ever, I'm going to do my absolute best not to catch it.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it could have happened to him at any number of times. And yeah, the Victorian government, I'm quoting from this article from The Age that was written by Anthony Galloway. There's this paragraph that says, just going to scroll up to find it. The Victorian government is insistent that there is advice from the ATAGI suggesting that contracting the virus in the past 6 months is a valid reason for not being vaccinated. But federal sources say that ATAGI did not endorse the process that the Victorian government or Tennis Australia put in place, and it was never engaged. So, I mean, I think this part is on these Australian organizations for not being in concert. That's a complete disconnect when, you have these players coming in from all over the world. You're trying to contain COVID the best you can. I mean, for these not to have the same policies or not to be in sync, I think it's crazy. It's remarkable to me that they didn't have everything in order, that one organization okayed a player coming in and another one can essentially override them because they weren't on the same page about this thing. And to be clear, Djokovic is also at fault here. He had all the time in the world to get vaccinated if he wanted to. There's no reason for him not to in like the first 6 months of the year. But he didn't. And so I guess how I feel is like, in a way, he brought all of this on himself, but at the same time, to be told essentially that he would be able to play, to make the flight over, have to stay 12 hours at the airport, to be like guarded in a room. And this is not unique to Djokovic. Like some people, when they have issues with their visa, have had to do that as well. Like many people on Twitter today were saying that. But then to be told that he can't play, like that's not ideal. I'm sure if he knew what was going to happen, he would have much rather not gotten the exemption in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. I think the issue that flared up today was likely an immigration issue. Something that I think ordinary citizens like you or me would have to deal with when going to another country. And so, for him to not have that clearance today was really surprising to me, just because we learned yesterday that he was already cleared sort of medically by the procedure that Tennis Australia and the Victorian state government had.
Yeah.
So it's unclear to me what sort of what was the documentation or proof needed that would have sufficed today for his entry. Right. That I think we're still waiting to hear.
Yeah, I think the frustrating thing for me about this is that so many things are unclear. I mean, we've just speculated that the reason he didn't get in was because of this 6 months rule that Tennis Australia and the ATAGI weren't on the same page about. But we don't know for sure. He was never clear about why he needed a medical exemption or wanted a medical exemption. Right. There's been this subplot that the reason he couldn't get in was because his team applied for the wrong visa, and that he got the medical exemption, but that the visa he traveled on didn't reflect that he had a medical exemption. That was the reason he couldn't get in. We don't really know much of anything for sure. And so we kind of have to guess. And it's frustrating because, this is a huge story. This is the world number one, 20-time major champion going for his 21st. He was the big favorite at this tournament. Now it looks like he's not going to play. It seems like he's been told to fly back tonight. And his lawyers are appealing this process, we've seen on Twitter, but we don't know if that's going to work. I have no idea how that process would go. I don't think he would have time or maybe even want to go back to Serbia, try to get another medical exemption, and then fly back over to play. Yeah, it's just a lot, and none of it is that clear.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the thing is that, there were also other players who got exemptions and are in Australia. So, my thing would just be just a little bit more transparency is probably needed as to sort of why Novak's situation is completely different in terms of, in terms of what makes him different from those handful. I think we learned yesterday that there were 26 players of this huge pool of around 300 that applied for this exemption. And I guess most of the ones that were approved were on the basis of that rule that we talked about
Yeah.
earlier about catching COVID in the last 6 months.
Yeah. So how did they get in, and then Novak didn't? Yeah.
Yeah, and so what now happens to those players?
Right.
Because then is that fair? Yesterday the conversation was: is he getting preferential treatment, and is he getting, is he getting? People were sort of saying that it reeks of favoritism and
Right.
things like that. Because yesterday the examples that we had in mind were the Russian player, for example, who was vaccinated.
But it wasn't an Australian approved vaccine yet.
Right, it was the Sputnik. And then you also had an Indian player, Dhaya, who's under 18 and he's in juniors. And he was ineligible to get the vaccine because in India you have to be over 18 to get it. And he was ineligible at the time. So, and then people in Australia were extremely, obviously, I guess for lack of a better word, pissed off about this happening, because here they were in Victoria, locked down last year for over 300 days. Some of them not able to see their family, not even able to go to the grocery store, but then move around without that much freedom, because Australia has done such a great job, right? Like containing the virus. And at one point they had 0 COVID cases last year. So you can absolutely understand the frustration from the Australian citizens' point of view.
Yeah.
And then for Djokovic, he was just misled, thinking, and he and his team, and we all thought, it's official. He's in.
Yeah, it's really what it seems like. Yeah, and like you said, yesterday the discussion was about preferential treatment, and now another area of kind of with another lack of clarity is like, why did these other people get in and he didn't? I think it's either because of the visa, like apparently his team messed that up. So I think one possibility is like it's that, and the other players applied for the correct visa, and that's why they got in without a hitch. Or Djokovic, by posting on social media, everyone found out what was going on, pissed off the Australian public. That drew a ton of attention to the fact that he was coming in with this situation. And then the Australian government felt pressure to kind of keep him out in order to placate the citizens. And again, I don't know which one it is.
And it seems like there's a lot of interplay and politics at play. So that, that's what you have to go with when there's this subjectivity around it, right? And the visa thing, I think, to me, I always thought that was more of sort of an administrative sort of role. Like, if a regular citizen, doesn't have the right visa, I struggle to think like that would be like these, that would be the reason as to like, okay, bam, like you're definitely not going to, like there's no sort of workaround or loophole around that at that point.
That is hard to imagine as well. Yeah. I know travel, there are a bunch of documents you got to fill out and everything, and even more so during the pandemic. But like you said, it is hard to imagine that this is the one thing that kept him out. And yet, like, I'm not a travel expert. There's nothing to suggest that like this didn't actually happen. I mean, some people have said that the entire visa story is BS and that just didn't happen. I'm like, there's nothing to suggest that that was the case, like concretely. So I don't feel comfortable making that assertion. I mean, another thing people are talking about now is what's going to be the fallout from this. Is some people are saying Djokovic is never going to play in Australia again, and it's possible. He's probably fuming right now that he thought he was going to get to play. Instead, he flies over, gets detained at the airport for 12 hours, and then is getting sent back. I mean, I think he's at a hotel quarantining right now. But if the appeal doesn't go through in hours, he's going to be flying back. Like, that's a terrible situation. He's probably miserable. Is he going to be able to forgive Australia and these organizations for the disconnect? Is he going to be willing to get vaccinated so that he can play next year? I don't know. Like,
and then the other pressing thing is, what about the other majors, that follow suit? Because it's quite likely, I mean, looking at the French Prime Minister's words, that it's going to be mandatory in France as well. And then moving forward with the other majors and the other big tournaments. So Djokovic is going to have to make a really big decision here. It's sort of, is he going to want to go through all of this hassle again and try to apply for another medical exemption and sort of do a workaround of the rules? Or is he going to be, willing to sort of change his approach to how he sees the vaccine? And, I guess that would be the advisable thing to do.
Yeah,
right?
That would be by far the simpler option. But the problem is that is not how Novak Djokovic operates. I mean, I've pictured someone on his team telling him, like, Novak, I know this is what you believe. I know you don't want to put something in your body. I know you don't want to be made to put something in your body. But if you don't do this, you are not going to get to play these big tournaments. It might compromise your entire legacy. Like, see the light, man, and just stick this needle in your arm, and all of this will go away. And I still don't know if he would do it. Like, this is not the way he, like, it's so fitting that this is what he has to deal with now. Like, it's never been about losing the close matches to his opponent for him. It's always stuff that he does to himself that creates his biggest problems. You know, it's the missed overheads on court, or getting defaulted at the US Open, or being careless in press conferences, and now not wanting to get vaccinated, which could have avoided all of this. It's all him. He can't get out of his own way. I mean, and it's fascinating because he's on court mentally, he's perfect at this point. You know, he does everything right, but at the same time, he has these self-defeating qualities. And like I said, it's fascinating, the duality of this, but it's also kind of heartbreaking. You know, like, it's all there for him. Like, it's there if he wants it. Like, all of these titles, he could. I mean, I think he's already the greatest of all time, but he could make it clear to everyone out there this year, and he just can't get out of his own way.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating because also the more evidence you provide, I feel like the less, when you go on your Instagram and your Twitter and you state the word exemptions,
Yeah.
It was clear that he was going to get a lot of backlash from that. Like, it was like, either he was going to not mention that and just, or not post, and then just, just show up to Australia and just sort of just go through the process normally, and without any fuss or anything, like, without any major announcement of any kind, which is what I originally thought he was going to do, to be honest, because the longer the time went on, during the off season, you almost felt like if he had been vaccinated, he would have announced it by now.
Yeah, I didn't think he was going to play at all, to be honest. Everyone in the previous months on Twitter were convinced that he was vaccinated, and that he was going to play, and all of this was just kind of toying with the media. It's like, I don't really know, like, I think it something just seems a little bit off. Like, I don't know if it's his style to get vaccinated and then just go and not really talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, even though he talks about wanting to keep it hidden, like, something just seems a little bit off. And you mentioned that statement he put on social media. I mean, I think that statement kind of encapsulated him in a way. Like, yeah, you had that line about the medical exemption, but most of that message was like, peace and love to all, Happy New Year. And it's like, I get it, Novak, you're not a bad guy, you're just careless. Like, it's these little things that you do that cause a world of trouble. Like, you're not mean, you're not a bad person. Everyone should know that. But like, these little slip-ups you have cause so many problems. And
just the tone of that came across really badly to the Australian public, because it's like, they're not, there's no love, peace, happiness for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Point,
Yeah, it's suffering, right? Like, they've been locked down for a long time, and I mean, I get it. It would be so frustrating to be, strictly following COVID guidelines for 2 years now, almost 2 years, and then you have a guy who has a history of vaccine skepticism, a history of pseudoscientific beliefs. He goes, I want to come into your country and play this tournament for 2 weeks unvaccinated, so I'm going to apply for a medical exemption. And then on social media, you see, I got the medical exemption. And I mean, if that were me, I'd be pissed. Like, a lot of them are pissed. It makes sense. It's hard to argue with.
Yeah. And I think the general vaccine skepticism that he's had for the last 2 years, I mean, he's been sort of vocally opposed to it, right? Yeah. So, I think it just goes back to his general lifestyle and just views on science, at this point.
Right.
If you remember, I think 3 years ago, I mean, he was heartbroken when he had to finally have surgery on his elbow.
Yeah.
And he cried for like 3 days straight.
Yeah, exactly. And he even put that surgery off, right? Because he had faith in that his body would just heal itself.
Natural healing, right?
Yeah, and it's like, we know that's not how things work, but he doesn't know that, and he's not going to change. And yeah, I think that these beliefs he had, I don't think they're the reason he didn't get in, but I think they contributed to it. Like, I think the Australian public became aware of this, and that kind of built up into the public backlash, which might have contributed to getting the government to be more inclined to keeping him out unless he had a really good reason to come in. Like, and again, it doesn't seem direct. It kind of reminds me of like with the Titanic, how they didn't have enough lifeboats to fit everyone.
I do remember that.
Yeah, like that wasn't the reason that so many people died. Like if they'd seen the iceberg and steered away from it, they would have been fine. But once that happened, the lack of lifeboats was a reason that a bunch of people died. And it's a morbid analogy, but it like that kind of reminds me
It makes sense.
of like Djokovic's history with these comments. Like, yeah, they weren't like his death knell or anything, but I do think they were a reason that this all ended up shaking out the way it did.
Yeah, for sure. And some people might scoff, but I feel like it's worth noting that a lot of those ideologies and sort of unconventional methods that he's had over the years, whether it be his diet or just his meditation, rehabilitation, or just just his holistic approach to life, like those things, he believes, and many people around him, and I guess we can see the evidence of the last 10, 12 years. I feel like it's really helped him on the court.
It has, yeah.
But I think that philosophy of life also has bled into these other areas like vaccination and pseudoscience, which is so harmful because also with the political climate that we live in now, I feel like, he's become sort of the poster boy for anti-vaccination, and sort of like he's like the figure for that cult group in a way. And I feel like that's so unfortunate because you don't want to be remembered. He doesn't want himself, nor would the tennis world, because he's such a great player, on the court.
And the thing is, like, I don't even know if he is staunchly anti-vax. I think he's vaccine hesitant. I think he's anti-mandate, but he's never said anything where he's like, I don't think people should get the vaccine. And yet anti-vax groups are using him as like a figurehead now. And he's said nothing to like not get them to do that. And
I also think he's an open-minded person. Like, I don't think, I don't think he's unreasonable in any sense. I feel like if he has the right people around him that sort of hold him accountable for this, and also explain to him calmly, like, Novak, I fully understand that you believe in these sort of principles. Yeah. But look at what it's doing to you. Look at what it's, look at the effect that it has on so many people, like who endorse your opinions, and use you as like the figurehead, like you were saying. And so I feel like, as long as I feel like if there's people in his team that hold him accountable, I feel like that's where it starts. Yeah. Because otherwise it's a deeply embedded view that I feel like it's not really going to change over time.
I agree. And I want to take a moment to expand on the point you made about these beliefs he has helping him on court. It's this insane contradiction. And I think that this point really needs to be made. Do not look to athletes for a political, social, or educational example. Like, these people are often not fully educated. To dominate in the athletic world, you need to have a mindset so tightly tailored to that just doesn't really translate to other areas of life. And this is why the best athletes are arrogant, they delude themselves, stuff like this. And this helps them on court. I mean, this is a very benign example, but you remember that Wimbledon final, Djokovic telling everyone, when the crowds chant Roger, I hear Novak. And I personally didn't think much of that, but a lot of people were like, wow, this is so sad. It's pathetic, And it's like, but he was able to convince himself of that, and it worked. But at the same time, like, being so certain of yourself means that when you believe something that is wrong, you're not going to be able to learn from it. You're not going to be able to grow and stop believing the thing that is wrong and start believing the thing that is right. And so when you have this fan base, and look, this is not all Djokovic fans. I don't even know if it's most Djokovic fans, but it has a very cult-like section that look to Djokovic like he's God. And they defend everything he does, and they don't admit that they're wrong. And so when you see Djokovic doing these things, you get people saying like, oh yeah, you shouldn't have to take the vaccine if you don't want to. Like, it should be a personal choice. It's like, no, that's not right. It shouldn't be a personal choice. Like, getting the vaccine helps other people. Like, everyone should get it. But they look to him. He's not a medical expert, but they look to him for medical advice. And so the point I'm trying to make here is like, stop looking to athletes to be your medical experts, to be a social example, to be a political example. And this doesn't mean that they can't be right about these things, but look, like, when you look at Djokovic, if you want to copy something, copy his backhand. Don't copy his beliefs about water, magic water.
Don't do that.
Like, look to actual scientists for that sort of thing, please, because this is really damaging in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's really well said, honestly. And I think Djokovic is an incredible player on the court.
Yeah.
He deserves all the accolades and all the success he's had, but he also shoots himself in the foot, right?
Yeah.
And we can all agree that a lot of this really could have been avoided, and it really shouldn't have come to this. So I guess the tennis world, we it's a big story now, and it will continue to be a big story, and we'll have further developments. And I guess to now, you just have to say it's his life and it's his choices, and tennis will just continue, and a champion will be crowned at the Australian Open. Games, sets, and matches will be played. And so I guess on we go. And so with that, I guess how does this change things now in terms of the men's favorites for the Australian Open? Because I think Daniil Medvedev now becomes the favorite.
I think so too. And I mean, I wrote a piece a few days ago before we knew that Djokovic wasn't going to play that basically said, like, even with Djokovic playing, I think Medvedev, like, it's title or bust for this guy. He's a mature player. He's experienced so much. Like, he has a major title. He has 4 Masters 1000s titles. He has a World Tour Finals title. He's lost major finals, and in different ways. He lost a really tight, physically exhausting heartbreaker to Nadal. He got destroyed by Djokovic. These are experiences that you learn from, that take years to have, but that you learn from. They make you more complete as a player. And I feel like he's not missing any of these crucial lessons anymore. I feel like he knows what he has to do. Doesn't mean he will win, but I think he's very well positioned to win.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously the recent hardcourt success the last 3 years really would indicate as such. I guess potential roadblocks in his way, maybe. I guess he's had a long season last year. Obviously achieved the U.S. Open title, and then had a strong finish to the end of the year, 2 finals at the end. One Davis Cup. I guess in some senses people are, fans of his, or I guess just general followers are probably just a little bit concerned that perhaps the season was too long for him, and maybe he didn't quite get the appropriate amount of rest, training, or just reset that you would need.
Right.
And I guess when he played the ATP Cup, the first match against Ugo Humbert, he was not quite at his best. He was playing against a very tough opponent. So Ugo Humbert is a really tough, I think, one of the more underrated opponents. You can really take your time away. You can use the angles. You can come at Medvedev, I guess, in a lot of ways that, a lot of other players on the tour just can't.
Yeah.
So I feel like it was a difficult matchup for him as well. And he definitely had his chances. But, physically, I do still have some, I guess, just some question marks because he's so efficient and he wins so easily most of the time. He's usually done in straight sets or things.
Yeah. And you forget that, like, he can start to cramp or start to vomit and stuff like that. It's cramping
for me, and that's something I'm going to keep an eye on because
in the heat of Australia.
He was cramping at the end of the U.S. Open, which he admitted in the press, and a lot of that was nerves or mental, physical, but combination of all three, I guess. But it is kind of interesting because apart from that U.S. Open match against Rafa, which really went the distance, I haven't seen him in too many long matches. Even the 5-setters that he won last year against Krajinovic, which he won 6.
That was a big old 5th set. Yeah, his
Cilic, which was similar. Like it was last 3 sets were kind of a breeze. So
and on grass you're not going to be playing too many long rallies anyway. His physicality is endlessly confusing to me because you have, he cramps in a straight set match or something, and then you watch him at the World Tour Finals, like in 2020, when not only does he beat the top 3 players in the world, but he tires them all out. Like Rafa, Djokovic, team were all tired by the end of their matches with him, and he was fine. And so you watch him like that, and you're like, is this the fittest player in the world? And then his first match of the season, he cramps and he vomits into a bucket. It's like, I don't think this is the fittest player in the world, and it's very confusing. In terms of rivals, I think, there's the obvious one to mention first is Zverev, and I think had the World Tour Finals final not played out the way it had, he would be way less worried about Zverev. But getting beaten in straight sets in a pretty flat match, I think, won't create the most ideal mindset. But I still think he's won 5 out of the last 6 against him. He was on quite a good streak against Zverev before that match. So I still think if their best matches up, Medvedev will come through. And then I think Rafa can usually work out some patterns to do well against Medvedev. I think in best of 5, Medvedev is better positioned on a hard court to win that match for sure. But, if Rafa has a peak performance, gets the slice going, is aggressive with his forehand, and doesn't have any physical issues, I think that could go either way. Although Medvedev, again, still the favorite. So I don't know. I think if Medvedev gets a tough draw, someone else could absolutely win. It's not like he's a Djokovic type favorite, but I really think this is his time.
Yeah, all good points. I definitely think I definitely have Rafa as sort of the third favorite now after Djokovic.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people will argue that it's Tsitsipas, and I'm still not convinced by him on a hard court.
I'm convinced by him right now either, especially physically as well. I mean, he just doesn't look right with the elbow. It was a little bit interesting actually, because at the ATP Cup he was scheduled to play his first match against Hubert Hurkacz.
Yeah.
And then there was it seemed like everything was going well in the off season, and he had the surgery, and for sure there was going to be complications, and it's going to be hard coming back. But he was then wrapped in ice on the bench, and didn't play his first match.
That didn't look good at all. But then he had a pretty intense 3-setter with Schwartzman, and even though he lost it, I mean, the last two sets 6-3, 6-3 for Schwartzman, it looked straightforward, but the second set at least was really complicated with a lot of break points. So I don't think that's a terrible result.
Yeah, I don't. I think that's a pretty decent result from first match after surgery. Diego's a quality top 15 opponent. Yeah. He just looked like he got tired at the end, and he probably hadn't served as much, that much in practice, and it just seemed like by the end, and Diego played really well the last two sets.
Yeah.
So and then it was a bit strange, sort of in the first match, because he then played the doubles, which I thought was interesting, because he didn't play the singles, but then I think he probably figured maybe less reps, maybe a little bit less at risk or something. Mm-hmm. But then in the press conference afterwards, it was him and sort of his dad, and they were both sort of giving conflicting views. Like he was like, I think it's he was talking about how the elbow is in really good shape, and he's been playing, and he feels much better about it than he's ever felt. And then his dad was sort of scoffing, like, "No, don't say that," that sort of thing. And then and at the same time, he's quite concerned and worried about it. So there's I guess questions will sort of just linger on about that kind of relationship between father and son.
Right. I mean, it's really shocking, because as we know, they're usually on the same page about everything. But yeah, I mean, honestly, the reason I have Rafa above Tsitsipas in my hierarchy is I feel like people don't remember that Tsitsipas actually hasn't done a ton on hard court. I mean, at the Australian Open, it's been a great tournament for him. He beat Rafa in 5 sets there last year. He's made the semifinals twice. But besides that, he has one Masters 1000 final on hard court. That was in 2018. And since then, he won the World Tour finals in 2019. But honestly, I think that was a blip. I think his return generally is not going to hold up on that surface against those players. And it was an amazing week for him. I don't want to take anything away, but it kind of felt like, I don't know, it would sort of feel like if Soderling had won the French Open during the Nadal era or something like that. Not undeserved or anything like that, but surprising and unlikely to happen again. And so I think I still don't think he has things figured out. He doesn't have a good block return. He doesn't have a good backhand on the move, really. The slice is not there. And so I just think if he comes up against a big server, it's not going to be good. I mean, the example that comes to mind is last year, after he beat Nadal, he came up against Medvedev in the semifinals. And I do want to say, he was tired. He had just played 4 hours. But he plays this match, and Medvedev wins 88% of his first serve points. And after the match, Tsitsipas says, "This guy has a serve like John Isner." And it's I don't think he does, it's a good serve. It's really good. Top 10, top 5 in the world, but it's not an Isner serve. And yeah, Tsitsipas just hasn't figured that part of his game.
I will say to the counter of that is that during that time frame when he was red hot Medvedev, I looked at his stats on Tennis Abstract, and he was serving better than a prime John Isner. I'm not even joking, but I guess
okay.
From Paris Masters to then, he was holding at a better rate than prime Novak Djokovic. I mean, he was returning at a better rate than prime Novak Djokovic on serve, and he was holding at a better rate than John Isner. But I feel like that sort of period is more of an outlier, and it's sort of
I think
reverts back to a little bit afterwards.
And those stats are also interesting because it's not just about the serve with the hold rate. It's also about how well you can back it up. And he's an infinitely better mover than Isner, so that might have had something to do with it. But I didn't know that, so I do stand at least partially corrected on that front. And look, I would love to see Tsitsipas have a breakout at a hard court tournament. I don't know. Until I see it, though, I'm just not going to be entirely convinced.
Yeah, no, I like the objectivity, especially because those are his two main weaknesses, especially the return of serve and the backhand on the move. And technically those are sort of the areas that you'd point to. But I still sort of think the second half of the year, it was not the real Tsitsipas, just because of the injuries and stuff after
I completely agree. Yeah.
Especially with the elbow just wasn't right after the U.S. Open, and he just didn't seem mentally in it, especially in Indian Wells when he was playing Basilashvili. He was playing all passive and tight for some reason, which is not really his game. He's more of an aggressive, all-court type player. And sort of at the end of the year, I don't really consider those results really put too much that much weight into it, like Paris and Vienna and ATP finals. I think he did have those semifinals at the end of after Wimbledon. Yeah. And in Wimbledon, by the way, I mean his grandmother passed away, and he didn't have the best preparation.
Yeah,
so
I think that loss to Tiafoe. Tiafoe played great. He was really, really good, but Tsitsipas coming off that French Open match, just absolute heartbreaker. And hearing that news about his family, I think we can give him a pass on that one.
Yeah, and then So that's why I'm really interested. That's why I sort of wish he was healthy, because I feel like that would make this Australian Open a lot more interesting, because he matches up a lot better. Medvedev is a bad matchup on hardcore. There's no doubt about it. And there'll be other opponents on their day who can pick him off, even in best of 5. But so we'll just have to see, because he's definitely one of the players who's not at his fittest right now.
Yeah. Here's a question. So, I mean, besides, these are going to be, I guess Nadal's not a top 4 seed because Rublev is. Rublev is going to be the 4th seed at this Australian Open. Just want to throw that out there.
No, so that's why I think it's going to be a huge opportunity, because because Rublev being the 4th seed and then the 3rd seed, Tsitsipas, I feel like those two are susceptible to an upset in the first week.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a great shot for someone to make for a first-time semifinalist, or maybe even a finalist.
If you're like a Felix or a Sinner or an Alcaraz.
Or an Alcaraz. And that was kind of what I was going to ask, is like outside, I can't say the top 4 because Rublev is there instead of Nadal, but outside of Medvedev, Zverev, Tsitsipas, and Nadal, who do you think is the most likely player to cause, like a big, I'm blanking on a word, to cause like a big shake-off for the men's Australian Open?
Yeah, somebody who I think, like, if healthy, will just sort of beat everyone he's supposed to, and we'll just go deep and could even make a semifinal and a final, is Berrettini.
Okay.
I feel like he just has the game where, if he's fully fit, he sort of has the offensive artillery, especially on a fast court, to sort of hit through most of the guys. But like physicality is a question with him as well. Especially because the way he went out sort of last year at the Australian Open, he was playing really well until he hit the 4th round. I remember he beat Khachanov in 3 tie breaks, and that was a pretty good quality match. And then he was supposed to play Tsitsipas, but then he withdrew because of an ab injury.
I think Berrettini may well have won that match as well. It's
would have had a good
pretty
chance.
Good matchup for him,
because I think they've played twice, him and Tsitsipas. One was at the Australian Open in 2019. That was the year where he had his breakthrough. I think that was a first round match, and it was tight. It was like 4 sets.
I think I remember highlights. Yeah,
and then once on clay, which you'd give the edge to Tsitsipas on clay. But so that was sort of an opportunity where, and I mean, if he does get past the quarters, I think he would be the only player born in the 90s to have made the quarters of all 4 majors, which is insane.
Yeah, I mean, Berrettini is a guy who he's really surface versatile, and that isn't really talked about that much. I mean, he has better surface versatility than Medvedev, Tsitsipas, Rublev, like probably Zverev as well. But no one talks about it because he makes quarterfinals and not semifinals. I mean, get that Wimbledon final, but yeah, I mean, last year Australian Open 4th round, French Open quarterfinals, lost to Djokovic. Wimbledon final, lost to Djokovic. U.S. Open quarterfinals, lost to Djokovic. Like, that is an excellent year, and I don't really think people talked about it that much.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Like, he could have had an even better year, honestly, than he had, like, at finishing at number 7, because he also had injuries in Wimbledon. So I feel like, he could have been the number 5 or number 4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of remarkable that he was injured in that Wimbledon final, because he was up a set, and he was close to going up a break in the 4th set. I think after the 2nd set, there wasn't really a lot of doubt about who was going to win, but it wasn't that far away from being a close match. Like, it was, looking back on it, it was impressive the way he played in parts of that match.
Yeah, for sure. And then you asked about some other players. So on the Americans front, I do want to say Taylor Fritz is playing really well right now.
Yeah, he is.
He's won 6 of his last 8 matches against top 20 players in the last 3 months, and some of those are like legit wins, like over Berrettini, Zverev. And I mean, those are all in best of 3 set matches. But he's never been past the 3rd round of the Australian Open, and with the way he's striking the ball right now and how good technically his game is, apart from just athletic limitations and mobility limitations. I feel like I feel like with the right draw, like he could definitely get to the quarters or second week. I think that's pretty reasonable, and I do sort of see him as a player who's going to make a big jump this year, just because he's entering the prime of his career now, and he's always had the goods, like technically.
Yeah,
so he's another guy.
I agree.
I feel
Unlike a lot of the American men, Fritz seems to be one who's actually improving. I mean, you can put Brooksby and Korda in there as well, and Tiafoe. I think a lot of the American guys have just kind of been stagnant for their careers. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I think this pick won't surprise you, but I feel like honestly, Alcaraz could do some really amazing things. Like, I mean, I've said that I think he's going to pass everyone in the world next year, rankings wise, except Djokovic, Medvedev, Zverev, and Nadal. Like, I think he's a better player than everyone in the world except those guys. Like, and I could see him going past all of them. I mean, of course, I'll end up eating my words when he loses in the first round at the Australian Open and then is injured for half the year. But I mean, I really think his serve is kind of the only issue. He hits the ball so crisply. It's athletic. He does well at the net. He returns incredibly well. He's, a top 10 or maybe even a top 5 returner on the men's side. He's got good touch. I mean, he had that horrible loss to Gaston in Paris, where he lost like 20 of 21 points or something like that. But, that's a lesson that everyone needs to learn at some point. No one is immune to choking. And I think since he learned that lesson this early in his career, maybe it won't happen to him next year. And he'll learn from it. So I think I could see him in the semifinals. I mean, I think he will need a little bit of draw luck because he'll run into a top seed before then. But, like if he's in Rublev's section or something, I could see him doing incredibly well.
Yeah. So, I mean, and then you sort of have your gatekeepers, right? You have your PCBs and RBAs of the world that you sort of need to cross if you want to win one of these majors, 3rd or 4th round. So, that's sort of the litmus test right now. Like when the big 3 are not playing, I feel like, I mean, especially RBA is sort of not in his kind of getting out of his prime now. He's a bit older, but like him and Diego Schwartzman and PCB, those are the 3 guys that I look at. Like, if you want to win a major, you got to pass those guys, especially.
I think that's a great tier of players. Kind of these veterans who aren't going to win a major, but who are going to make you have to work really hard to win a major.
That's a good one, because I think that there's a misconception in the tennis media, which I feel like is like there's like 20 players so that without the big 3 they could have won a major, and I just don't think it's true. Because
I don't think so either. Like, I don't think they have big enough games.
Because look at the players who have really only been affected by the big 3 not winning slams. Andy Murray, for one. Then you have like maybe a Tomas Berdych and like your Ferrers of the world, really.
Songa maybe could throw him in there. Yeah.
I'm looking at players that have made multiple quarters and semis of majors and have just been stopped. Like Diego Schwartzman, he's a great player. He's had a wonderful career.
But one semifinal.
But one semifinal in his career. And same with RBA, one semifinal.
Yeah.
Same with PCB, 2 semifinals. So, those players were not really affected by the big 3.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at the players who have kind of broken the stranglehold, like, Cilic once and Wawrinka 3 times. I mean, these are players who have all the firepower you could ask for. And you look at RBA, PCB, and Schwartzman, they're just a very different type of player. Like, I think that kind of game means consistency, but it does not mean the blindingly high peak level that you need to win a major in this era or even in a different era. So I agree with you. I don't think either of them have necessarily been robbed in any way. Maybe of a Masters 1000, but I don't think of a major.
Yeah, I agree. And then, just somebody who I'm just going to see if he sort of holds up to his seed is Casper Ruud. I feel like, a major not getting to a 4th round or a quarterfinal would sort of be a bit of a disappointment because he's been so hard courts, improvements wise since last year.
Yeah, so, I mean,
he's another guy.
He really has come a long way on hard courts, but that hasn't manifested itself in the majors quite yet. So I agree that I'll definitely be looking for him to make a good run. I mean, I think
that about does it really on the men's
side. That's kind of all I have. I mean, and that was fun to talk about. It made me forget for a little bit that
Yeah.
the best player of all time, 9-time champion, probably isn't going to be taking part. So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the obviously the second favorite has to be Zverev. Anytime we talk about him, we have to mention the allegations.
Yes, credible allegations that he really hasn't done anything to disprove.
The late articles by Ben Rothenberg and the first piece as well, and the ATP investigation continues. But reality is he's playing the best tennis right now of his career, and he's won 4 of the last 7 tournaments, and he's won I think 34 matches since Wimbledon and only lost 4. So he's definitely a second favorite and a big contender for this title. So, and probably even more now since Djokovic is not in his section. I guess Medvedev won't have to go through him to get to the final. So that's
so he can get there physically first, probably at least.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, we'll see how the men's side unfolds, but definitely we saw last time what happened when Djokovic was not in a major at the 2020 US Open, and that was
God. Don't remind me of that match.
Yeah, but I think it's good. This is going to be more exciting because I feel like we have a wealth of talent, at least in the top 10 now, and they're all sort of 25 and under, and they'll be eager to make their breakthroughs. And look, the US Open was a great tournament. I mean, we had 4 or 5 setters, especially the first week on the men's side was really good. And of course, you still have names that will attract big stories, like Nadal not being in, Nadal not having won this tournament in 2009.
Yeah.
I mean, if he can just get healthy and work his way into form, I mean, what an opportunity, because now, we could have Djokovic winning Roland Garros last year for the second time, and we could have
I mean,
his way in the draw, obviously, because Medvedev and Zverev are tough. But
I mean, you're right. I actually wrote like a 3,000 word thing on Nadal in the Australian Open like a few days ago. I'm waiting to release it because he's playing in other tournaments, and it wouldn't really make sense to put it out now. But now the narrative has kind of switched a little bit, because with Djokovic not here, and I still don't think he's going to win, but he's got a much more realistic chance to win. And this is the tournament that has eluded him for his entire career, with the exception of 2009. He is so much history here. He's played so well, and yet he just has the one title. So yeah, I'm excited to watch him, because even though he's like he doesn't do that well at the Australian Open in terms of titles, I think he usually plays well. He usually takes part in one of the best matches of the tournament. So yeah, I can't wait. I honestly have more fun watching him at the Australian than I do at Roland Garros.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Some of his matches at the Australian Open have just been like epic. Even matches that he's lost, he's been part of a great match. So
yeah.
I think that about does it, I think, for Australian Open men's chat. And obviously we'll keep updated on the Novak Djokovic story.
We'll have a women's preview at some point.
Yep, and we'll have another draw show, and I guess we'll also talk a little bit about we'll do another podcast. Basically, we're gonna have more podcasts this month.
There will be more podcasts. Yeah, I mean, I hope you got something out of this, that you could kind of relate to us venting at some points, that you learned something maybe you didn't know about the story, that us talking about the other players maybe took your mind off Novak a little bit. But I mean, I guess if I'm to say anything as my last words for this episode, I think the Australian Open is still an outstanding tournament. I think it's the best one of the year. Players are going to be fresh. They're going to get night matches with the crowd's going to be into it. Players are going to be playing well. There's so many other storylines to follow. I think it's still going to be a great event. So don't let this Djokovic story put you off.
Yeah, well said. And with that, thank you, Owen, for joining me.
Thanks.
It was fun, and let's do this again.
All right, sounds good. Bye.